I wanted to share with you for maybe about 15 minutes here some of the learnings from the credit union. It's been a very exciting time. It's been a very challenging time. But on your tables, on each of the tables, there's just a little card that you can kind of carry around with you. Don't hand it out as a business card. It's there as a resource for your ministry and your church. And one of the things I kind of want to share with you this morning was talking about some of the characteristics that we see in financially healthy churches. I mean, that's the world we live in, financially, dealing with a lot of balance sheets and income statements. But, you know, when you begin talking about health, if you think about health or illness, for that matter, when you start getting sick, if you think about it, that actually happens over a progression of time, doesn't it? It just doesn't happen automatically. Obviously, with New Year's resolutions, some are still on that. Some have given up 2 weeks ago. I gave up a long time ago. But this whole idea of trying to get to a healthy position for you physically, it takes time. And what I'd love for us to do this morning is just think about that and put that into the context of the church. If you feel as though your church is not as healthy from a spiritual standpoint, from a financial standpoint, understand that it's just going to take time. There is no, I wish, I'm sitting at a table full of iPads, there's no app for it. I wish you could just download the app, free app that says Financially Healthy Church. Click it and all of a sudden it happens. It just doesn't. It takes a tremendous amount of time. Actually health comes a lot of times from genetics too, doesn't it? Genetics. Some of you have inherited poor genes from a church perspective. Poor habits over the years. So as we begin going through some of these indicators, the 6 healthy indicators of financially healthy churches, I just want you to pause for a moment and just think about, where does my church stand related to some of these particular issues? When you think about it, in perspective, we take a look at back in 2000, since 2008, more than 200 churches and or religious organizations have faced foreclosure according to the CoStar Group. That's quite a bit. I mean, pre-2008, church foreclosures averaged less than 10 per year. And now we're seeing it all over the news. We're seeing it all over magazines. We're seeing it in public publications. The Thomas Reuther Westlaw legal database shows that foreclosure proceedings against U.S. churches have nearly tripled since December of 2007. And this is a report as of 2010. I would imagine that's continued to move forward. And obviously Barna, with the statistics that they have, found that more than half of the U.S. churches said they've been hurt by the recession, with 1 church in 6 cutting staff. And I would venture to say that there's probably many of the churches here today that have had to go, they've needed to make some of those cuts themselves. The thing about recession or these very difficult times, it's not discriminatory, isn't it? It's an equal opportunity recession. Doesn't matter. It's equal opportunity. It doesn't matter what size your church is, what kind of a staff you have, what denomination you are. It will hit you, and it will hit you hard. And some of you are hopefully seeing the back end of that. Well, 6 of the characteristics that we've seen from our experience. First one is garmentizing your mission. What I mean by this is garmentizing your mission, it's taken off the word of the Garmin, right? The GPS system. How important is it? We find the number 1 characteristic is that ministries that are healthy, churches that are healthy today, financially, are those that have their mission right in front of them. For all of your stakeholders, we're talking about not only for your board of elders, not only for your finance committee or your audit committee, but for your stakeholders, your congregation members, those who are giving of themselves and their finances to entrust to your ministry. They keep it at the forefront. When you have that one site, that one destination in mind, it doesn't matter where and what destination people have started from. As long as they know what the end result is, they know where to go. And you need to keep that in front of your stakeholders. That's the number 1 characteristic that we see. Here's a quote, and this is actually taken from some surveys that we've taken at the credit union through what's called the Ministry Advisory Panel. These are a group of ministries, nonprofit organizations, churches, parachurch organizations included. But this is one of the things that the churches specifically have said related to their health. They said, give the vision repeatedly, promote eternal-based programs and solutions. The congregation has increased their financial support as a result because of the belief in the mission of the church. That's the reason they attend your ministry. That's the reason they go and listen to the message. That's why they get themselves involved in the small group, because they see the fulfillment of the mission of what your church is all about. The number 2 characteristic that we've seen And again, it's not a formal study, but it's the engagement that ECCU has with literally almost 2,000 ministries across the nation. This is what we see consistently. In fact, this is the top reason, the number one reason of why we've seen ministries fail is leadership. And what I mean by leadership is unhealthy leadership. In the sense, leadership that's unwilling to be transparent. Some of the qualities that we desire to see in ministries, that we see in financially healthy churches, are leadership that's very transparent. They communicate like you wouldn't believe. They communicate to everyone. They don't try to hide things from ministries or from their stakeholders or feel as though they're trying to protect them. They're willing to make difficult decisions. True leadership comes up during actual times of very challenging times, isn't it? It's not when things are going really well. It's when times are very difficult. That's when true leadership comes to the surface. The other thing in talking about leadership has to do with the composition of your board. We take a look at the composition of that board. We want to see, what kind of a board do you really have? Are they just a yes board? Do they just simply say yes, 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 whatever you want to do, we'll support you, as opposed to surrounding your board with men and women who bring a different perspective to the table of your mission in your ministry? Let me share a quick example. We were struggling with a ministry down in Colorado Springs, and this is a clear indicator of the leadership that was required in this ministry, or lack thereof. It was a ministry they were running about 1,000 members. It was a fairly large church. Well, during the time of the recession, over a year and a half time frame, their attendance dropped from about 1,000 to 382, okay? Something's not right. Their income dropped from $2 million to $1 million. And let me share with you, when they were running about $1,000 to $2 million in tithes and offerings, their staffing expense was about $600,000. Seems adequate. Guess what it was when their income dropped 50% and their congregation dropped almost 62%? $600,000. Staffing expense remained the same. You see what I mean? Unwillingness to make difficult decisions during times that really matters. We believe that's where true leadership starts coming into play. Here's what some of the churches have said. Increasing financial transparency and tightening the budget made a big difference, setting monthly giving goals based on the monthly percentage of the budget. We've experienced that folks respond when they understand the need. Again, good communication is absolutely essential. The third characteristic that we see of financially healthy churches, in fact, this is the number 2 reason why we see churches or ministries closing. It's liquidity. And I describe it as healthy liquidity because everybody has a liquidity. It's just a matter of how much, right? I would venture to say if this was a group of senior pastors, conversation would look a little different. You want how much in the bank? You want how much sitting as reserves? These are executive pastors. Could you struggle with that a little bit? Because you recognize the need to have some level of liquidity out there. As I said, we see this as the number 2 reason of why ministries fail today. From our perspective, when we take a look at liquidity, we're talking about unrestricted cash, right? Cash that you could use by the board, whether they designate it or not. A fair number out there that we would say is as a percentage of your income throughout this number, we're seeing typically about 16 to 18% of that total income would be considered a healthy number. So you're thinking through, okay, my annual budget is about $1 million. $160,000, $180,000 sitting there? Well, I'll share with you a little bit in the number 5 reason, or the 5th characteristic of a financially healthy church, why that's so critical. I think one of the biggest challenges when you take the leadership component of it, or a leadership that's unwilling to make difficult decisions, and you combine that with unhealthy liquidity or an unhealthy cash position, you essentially are pouring gas on a spark in a little flame that's already started. And so everything is driven obviously from the mission. Once again, have a very clear mission. But the leadership, if the leadership is unwilling to be transparent, communicate, and make the difficult decisions, regardless of whether you have the other 4 remaining healthy characteristics, that poor leadership could kill it all. Here's what some of the churches have said. We've cut some non-essential ministry activities, focused on the basics, and began to build cash reserves, regardless of the fluctuations in giving. And you know what's really hard about ministry? I serve as a children's pastor at my local church. I've been serving for about 20 years now. And time again, I'm one of the weird children's pastors that say, I want to see the budget. I want to see how much reserves I have to be able to work with the fluctuations of what could happen in the ministry. I'm one of those odd ones. And my treasurer, he goes, what do you want? What do you want? I said, so, a little tension there. But that's one of the things in terms of the liquidity piece of it. It's so absolutely critical. And I'll share again a little bit of some of the components related to how you get to that healthy liquidity number. The number 4 reason, or the 4th characteristic that we see of very financially healthy churches is this. It's a very proactive culture. And what I mean by that in your DNA, it's not we see churches that are very progressive in the sense that they're looking for, let me put it this way. The most difficult decisions to make in a ministry, as you're aware, is not so much what you say no to, it's what you say yes to, isn't it? Because that's the business that we're in, quote unquote business. We're in the business of people. And when you see a need in a ministry, you feel like saying, yeah, let's do that, let's meet the need. But again, going back to the mission of your ministry, of your church, if it isn't in clear line-side alignment with your mission, then all of a sudden you become very diluted, and you're trying to be all things to all people. Well, in a very proactive culture, you're going through the rigorous discipline of saying, does this ministry, does this extension of who we are, does it and is it in alignment with who we are as a mission, in terms of our mission and trying to accomplish it? We clearly see that unhealthy churches are reactive more to the financial changes than they are very proactive. In fact, there was a study done in late 2010 it came out actually from Kiplinger magazine, and it took took a look at all of the for-profit businesses as well. And they asked the question, if you could do things different today, learning and knowing what you know about the recession, what would you have done differently? And one of their top thoughts were this: they wish they would have made the cuts across the board, whether it's staffing or business related. They wish they would have made the cuts sooner. And I think there's some principles that we as churches could take a look at and carry that over into the ministry. Here's what some of the churches have said. Aggressively, this is what one church does, and maybe this is something that you want to take a look at. Health coverage, that's a very important part, a very significant portion of your budget today. But this is what one church, they aggressively solicit bids on major vendors. Just going down the line item and identifying, are there things that we could be a little bit more proactive in terms of our expense control? Here's the 5th characteristic of a financially healthy church. Don't spend everything. Okay, I know it's a simple concept, very difficult to implement. And obviously that's where the tension comes with the senior pastor, right? Money in the bank means we're not doing ministry. We could be saving souls with this additional 10,000 or 100,000. I understand that, and we understand that. But what we see in unhealthy churches is that they've spent everything, and there's nothing left. You see, because what happens when you don't have reserves set aside and you spend everything that comes in, you have no room for operational fluctuations if all of a sudden your top giver goes away. We had one church in the city of New York where their top giver was a New York Yankee. He was giving $800,000 a year. Guess what happens in the major leagues? They get traded. And do you think if he gets traded, he's going to continue to tithe back to the church in New York? Probably not. And so understanding the possible fluctuations. There's also the capital replacement reserves that go into this. If you spend everything, you don't have any cash remaining. What happens if your HVAC system goes out and you're a church in Arizona and it's in the middle of July? Makes it a little bit uncomfortable. You have to begin setting aside funds for those capital replacement reserves. It's not the most exciting capital campaign to say, hey, congregation, we're going to go ahead and we're going to raise some funds for an HVAC system. Ministry opportunity reserves. You have to think about what are the doors of opportunity that God will open up, and you can't because you look at the pastor and say, we don't have reserves to be able to step through those doors. That's probably one of the most painful, when you don't have the capacity to be able to do that. You know, when you begin thinking about spending everything, I don't think, I would venture to say, and I'll go on a limb, but I think the congregation in your churches, respective churches, I don't think they necessarily want to be viewed as the bailout plan, right? Hey, we're short on cash. Could you bail us out? Could you bail us out? I think that's what we see all the time, just even in government spending, right? Bail us out, bail us out. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, right? It's the same concept, I think. poor fiscal policy or poor fiscal decisions among the leadership in a church, the congregation members aren't really excited, nor do they get really excited about wanting to bail that out. Here's what one of the churches said: keeping expenses down has been the largest help in actually meeting their ministry goals. The sixth and the last characteristic of what we see are financially healthy churches is that volunteers are the key. There was a study done from GuideStar back in 2010. There were 7,000 responses. And of those, they said 17% used one or more volunteers in previously paid positions. You fast forward that to actually November of 2010. This was within about a 6-month time frame. That figure went up to 22%. There are more and more ministries beginning to rely on volunteers. And we see that actually as a very healthy model because they take full ownership. These are people, if they can't give financially, they're willing to give of themselves. And they do it because of why? We go back to the number one reason. It's because of the mission of what you're involved with. As I said, there is no quick fix to becoming financially healthy. I would encourage you, as you go back to your board, one of the things that you might want to do, I do this with churches all the time, is I sit with their board or their finance committee and I'll take out a Post-it note and I'll say, I'll tell you what, let's do this. On a grade of, just a standard grade, A, B, C, D, and F, why don't you grade the financial health of your church? And ask your board members to do that. Write it down anonymously and then post it up and see what kind of a grade you get. Here's where the challenge comes. If all of a sudden you see somebody giving it a D and the chairman of the board, you discover, actually gave it an A, you're not on the same page. You do that similarly also with the spiritual health of where the board and the committee feels as though the church is spiritually. Try to grade it. And you'll see, until everybody, the leadership is on the same page, it's very difficult to continue to move forward in the fulfillment of your mission. And so hopefully some of those, like I said, the cards on there, carry that with you in terms of the 6 characteristics and just kind of gauge it against your particular ministry and see where you're at. I'm going to be sticking around for the rest of the session today and tomorrow and would love to talk to you if you have questions specifically related with your church. And I know David has a couple of questions here.
Here, we can share this.
Okay.
You just turn it on. Well, you know, it was a year ago at the chapel when I came. I'm standing in front of this thing. That doesn't work well. Let's go the other way. So one of us is 6'3", by the way. I was in Japan one time at a Shinkansen at a bullet train, and I was getting a drink of water at the drinking fountain, and I didn't see any of this. My wife saw it. So I was bending over at this little drinking fountain, and the little 4-year-old Japanese girl came up next to me, and she put her foot next to my size 14s. And she went away laughing. She thought that was the funniest thing in the world. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so it was a year ago here at the seminar, some of you know, at the chapel, because of the recession and the chapel had had too many staff and attendance had slipped a little before we had come. And we were going to let go of $750,000 worth of staff. And they were all good folks. They were great folks. It wasn't that, oh, we're going to clean house because there's these bad staff. They were all great staff. But we did that when we had $10 million budget, 10 or 11, depends on how you add up the numbers. Sure. And we had $2.4 million in the bank. Because we saw, hey, we could run through, we're halfway through our fiscal year, we could run through $375,000, and we didn't want to do that. So how are we going to treat these people well? And so we were able to do really good severances. Now, it was very painful for the folks. And now our cash total liquidity is about 2.6 in the bank, so about 26. So as an exercise, take out a Post-it note or on that sheet with the notes, and I would encourage you just put down a rough number of what your budget is and put down what your cash in the bank is. And let's do this just for fun. And, you know, we do have a camera back there, but we won't pan the audience for this. So who out there, who's at over 20% liquidity? 15 to 20. 10 to 15. 5 to 10. Who has $1 in the bank? So talk a little bit about the liquidity issue. How did you come up with that number 16 to 18? Was it just what a lot of good churches were doing, or did you do kind of formula going into that? How did you all come up with it?
That's a great question. The liquidity piece of it, it's very unique to, I think, every ministry. You know, obviously with a ministry that has a brand new facility, you don't have to rely as heavily on maybe some of the capital reserves. But those three main components, that's really how we derive at it. We try to understand what your operational cash flow cycle is, because during the summer months, we know, guess what, people go on vacation and they just don't catch up on their tithes and offerings.
Right.
And then you talk about the capital replacement reserve. It's trying to understand what are the things, just walking around your church and just going, you know what? Boy, this is starting to go. Again, taking a look at some of the major capital expenses.
And you know what's really hard? How many people are multi-site here? You know what you get with multi-site? 2 facilities.
Yeah.
We have a new, $30 million campus, and we have the old $30 million campus. And in the next 10 years, we need $10 million to just do HD cameras. How many guys do and women do HD cameras and video? And what's the shelf life of those cameras? It's like 7 years max, right?
Absolutely.
So you're looking at $500,000. So I had our director of facilities come up with a plan, a 10-year plan, and it was a shocker. It was rough.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the mission is so critical, is when you understand if the mission truly is to reach out, and you're multi-siting, those are some of the costs that I think a lot of ministries, unfortunately, and a lot of churches don't take into consideration. We're working with a church right now, and they're having to rethink their whole multi-site strategy, because I just simply brought up the question of, what are you going to do to prepare for the capital replacement? He goes, oh. Didn't have an answer for that.
So what kind of tools? ECCU has a lot of tools. Got a white paper on the website for you guys to look at on the password-protected website. But talk to me if my church isn't well connected financially yet, or I have a newer finance team, or even for an experienced one. I know you have a tool, so tell me about it. What's the name of it, and what'll it do for me?
One of the things that, again, driven by the passion of what we're trying to do, we're trying to get ministries to be more effective in what they do, and being financially healthy is absolutely critical. So one of the tools we developed was called a financial health assessment. And
what's in it?
It's really a component. It's trying to get the underwriter's mind to take a look at your financials without submitting an application fee and incurring significant costs. It's just to get the perspective of an underwriter to say, XYZ Community Church, this is how we believe your ministry looks like financially, and we try to grade you. And again, there's no cost for it, which is really the big word in ministries today, free. But it's so important, because if nobody's telling you the truth about what you look like financially, you think you're great. You think your blood pressure's fantastic, when in fact you're in the middle of a heart attack. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we have, I asked Jay from Mountain Springs Church in Colorado Springs, they kind of went through this process and how it's helped them. I don't know if Jay, if you'd be willing to just kind of share real quickly, maybe one of the benefits or how it's helped your particular ministry.
Springs. I'm the director of operation and finance, and about a year and a half, 2 years ago, David came to me with, I call it our report card. It just gives us a snapshot of where we were financially in those areas that we needed to work on. It lists everything from our percentage, our staff percentage of budget, and along those lines, and where we were loan to value, our loan to value ratio. It's a great tool. It also opened up dialogue with not only David and myself, but also with our leadership team. We were able to focus in on those areas that we needed to take a look at. David gives us a great perspective, and ECCU has been an amazing partner for us as we looked at different areas of ministry and those areas that we could cut back on. Amazing tool. So thanks, David.
David, I liked your emphasis on point 6, volunteers are the key. I come at it and from the perspective of Ephesians 4. My job as a pastor is not to primarily do ministry. My job is to equip and empower others to do ministry. And the people I have the hardest time convincing that are pastors. Because I've had many of them look at me and say, well, what am I supposed to do then? Well, wait. Let's just start with the Bible. It's a pretty good book. It's been around a while. It's a bestseller, And then helping them see, hey, if you empower and train 10 volunteers and we get rid of 2 or 3 staff positions, your role is to train up and give spiritual formation and then direct ministry oversight to those people. But, and then, the commas go on from there. And so it's a culture shift to bring people and to move them down the road.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you see that in your role. Talk about your role in children's ministry at your own church and the use of volunteers. Are you practicing what you're preaching?
I have my shortfalls, trust me. Even after 20 years, it just feels like you're trying to drag people into volunteering. But I think for me, in trying to stay true to the mission of who we are as our church, where I'm serving at, I just try to keep the mission out there, one child at a time. Okay, we may have the next Billy Graham right here, and you'll have the opportunity to be able to touch this kid. Okay, because if you don't, somebody will. Who's it going to be? And just trying to continue to keep that vision out there. They just love that. I dream of the day when everybody kind of raises their hand. I want to do it, and I have a waiting list. Waiting list. Would that be great to have volunteers to say, I really want to step up? But I think that puts it on me as the pastor overseeing the children's, is to cast that vision and keep it in front of them constantly. I think if you do that, you're going to end up ultimately, as a lagging indicator, financially healthy, just because you're doing what God has called you to do.
Okay, so XPastor has very few sponsors because I want people who have a ministry mindset. Everyone knows we have to put bread on the table, but what makes ECCU's leadership? This is point number 2 for you on leadership. What's the uniqueness about ECCU's leadership?
If you've gotten a chance to, I've been at the credit union now, this is my 20th year, and it's by no accident why I stay in doing what I'm doing is I see it as a ministry. Mark Holbrook, if you've ever gotten a chance to meet him, he's almost like, my biological dad passed away when I was 18. And I've told Mark, I said, I almost look to you as my father, my earthly father, in the sense that I look to you from a leadership standpoint. I ask him questions about how he raises his 5 kids, and they all are just following the Lord so incredibly. So I think from a leadership standpoint, how he leads is so critical, and who he surrounds himself with. He surrounds himself with an executive team that are so different from him, not like him. He doesn't want yes people around him. And ECCU's just passion for and how important leadership is within the churches and the ministries is this. He's taken a step to serve alongside with Dan Busby over at ECFA. ECCU's absolutely, we're serious about the leadership component in that he's taken on a role to spearhead a committee to try to encourage churches to join ECFA. The leadership component in ministries are absolutely critical, and we are determined to communicate that message until Christ returns, because that is so critical of what we feel today.